Hello, the subject of this tutorial is creating a log form using Adobe LiveCycle Designer. The next few slides are just a quick run through of the points, the steps that we're going to follow through this tutorial. I will repeat selected slides throughout the presentation, and we'll also put them at the end so that they're there again for you to review the steps at the end. These are just the summary steps, just the key points to remind you, well, first off, to set the scene of what we're going to be doing, and then at the end to remind you of what you need to do for this process. So this is a little bit of a long tutorial, so I've got the steps in there. I know people have found it useful before to have them there on the screen. So let me know what you think, and thank you for your patience. This is probably the longest tutorial I've done. A little bit rough in places, but I'm hoping you'll find it useful. Your feedback is welcome. Hello, my name is Stephen Knight. This is a Trainerscope tutorial. We're going to have a look today at Adobe LiveCycle Designer and building a practical example based on some work I did recently with a client, and also running through solving some problems that came up. So we're going to have a look at working with subforms, being able to add additional subforms, getting our content to have page breaks and flow onto additional pages, and keeping our layout consistent as we move between pages. The best way to illustrate this is, let's have a look at a little worked example here. So I'm going to preview this form. Now I've started this off with 3 subforms, and we can add more as necessary. So we've got a date of action, we've got how many hours we spent with the client. I've got some Latin filler here to use as the content, or I will have some Latin filler. Just give me a moment. So I also have some Latin filler here to use as content. Now you'll notice when I tab off this, we can see that our text box, our multi-line text box stretches. So we'll put another date where we've done something else for this particular client, how many hours, and a report on what we did. And again, another interaction, another number of hours. Now you might have noticed the bottom section of this form moving down, so we can see here that our instructions and our digital signature field have moved down the form, and that's what we want. Now we've used up our standard 3, so although you could start off with as many as you need, we'll see that in the settings. And we'll just continue now. We're getting close to the bottom of this page. In fact, you'll notice we've already moved over, and I've got a little continued on the next page because the instructions and the signature, I didn't want those to split, I want those to stay together. But our other subform here allows us to split, and we should be very, very close. Oh, very close. Let me just add a little bit more in here. So we've written our story, and you'll notice it's splitting for us, and the report content is actually continuing, occupying the same space on the additional page. We've also got the ability to add a new row, and we can continue our report. And I'll just make one last entry in the log of our interactions for this particular client or customer, and then I can apply a digital signature, and the digital signature here. Now this is a self-signed digital signature, so it's it's really just for testing and in internal use. If you want to learn more about digital signatures, there's some good resources on the Adobe website, and you could perhaps go and have a look at the Echo Sign service. So I'm just using a little self-signed ID that says, I, Stephen Knight, say I am Stephen Knight. And so I've now signed that, which you'll notice has also locked the fields. You will have noticed the colours change. So I can't type over any of that information. So that's the process we want to go through to that process to create a log that will extend over to additional pages and that we can do a digital signature. So back in a moment for the actual how-to. Rightio folks, let's build this form. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually rename the subform, the main subform. I'm just going to call this main form, just to make the navigation a bit easier so I can see what belongs to what. Now the very first thing I'm going to do is actually build that little message that we saw come up for the continued on next page. So I'm just going to grab a text box and bring that in, and just increasing the zoom a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. So I've got my text box here, and this is just going to say continued on next page. Now, what I need to do with this is I'm going to wrap a subform around it because ultimately it needs to be in a subform. So I'll wrap it in a subform, and I'm going to rename this subform continue message. So no spaces in our subform names, and the text object, I could even rename that as the actual message. So having set that up, we've created a subform with just a text object. Really, it's not even a text field, it's just a text object with our message to say, hey, continued on the next page. Now what I'm going to do, we don't want to display this on the actual form till it's needed. So it's going to be called upon. So it's actually going to be a referenced object. So I'm going to drag that down and drop it in the referenced objects. Now how do we put this to use? Well, I'll now go back to my main subform. I'm just going to expand some settings over on the right, and I'm in the object panel with the main form selected. I'm going to go to pagination, and I'm going to say, right, we can have an overflow trailer. So I'm going to pick continued message, so you can see that it's actually given me the choice of choosing from my referenced objects. Well, it's automatically supplied it to make it very, very easy for me. So that's going to, when there is an overflow, we'll get the continued message, which if you're printing out a form then means you can see that there's meant to be more on an additional page. So let's save at this point, and we'll call this our log form because we're building a log. And I'm going to save at regular intervals as we go along. So far so good. Now where we're heading next is back to the actual subform itself. And the main subform is going to be flowed, and we will allow page breaks in our content. So what I need to do at this point is to insert a subform. So I'm just going to right click on my main form and choose to insert a subform. Now this subform is positioned, and I'm actually happy with that. I'm happy for this to be positioned, and I will stretch it out because we're going to need all the width. We won't need all the depth, but we will adjust the height of it a little bit further on. Now, so we've got our subform. Now I'm going to rename this object, and this is going to be the log entry. Okay, because we're going to ultimately have multiples of these log entries. So we've got our subform, we've renamed it, it's going to be a log entry, it's going to be positioned, and again I'll just bring up all the properties. I do want to repeat this, so we need at least one, and we might start off with 3. Now we won't see the 3 till we actually preview, but you might assume that people will do at least 3 entries in the log, so we'll give them 3 to start with. So where we're heading next is we are heading over to our fields in the object library, and we need a date field, so I'm going to grab a date field and move it in there. Now a couple of things I want to do. I'm in the layout tab, and I would like the caption to be on top, because what we're going to ultimately have here is the date field, and this we can edit this little caption on the top, and we can have this as the date we took some action. Now if I go back to the object panel, I need to give this in the binding tab a sensible field name, so I'm going to call this date action. And over in the field tab, that's all looking good. So you could from here get in, for example, into the display patterns to affect the presentation of it, but I'm happy with the defaults that I'm going to be getting. So far so good. First field. Now our next field we want is a numeric field where we want people to give us the number of hours. So we'll drag that in there, and again if I go to layout, I'd like the caption to be on top. There it is, and we'll change this to say number of hours. Now I'm just going with a plain numeric field here, but you could use a decimal field if you were going to be like 3.5 hours, something like that, or even just a text field if you weren't going to be doing any maths with it later. In this particular exercise we're not doing maths, but you might want to add something, a field at the bottom perhaps, to total up your hours. Won't be covering that in this video, but I've got others already on YouTube that do cover that. So we've got our number of hours. Now our last field that we want is a text field. Oops, wrong text field. We want a text field, one of those. And with this particular text field, again in layout, I'll put the caption on the top, and this is our actual line of the report, and I'll move that up into position. Now I'm actually going to stretch that out. Now this is time for me to reduce my zoom, so I've just gone there to fit to width, and I want to stretch it out and make it a little bit deeper, and that's just LiveCycle reminding me that I will need to make this allow multiple lines, but that's all good. So now if I go to the object tab, this is exactly what we're going to do. Let's allow multiple lines. I won't limit the length to the visible area. So we're allowing multiple lines. That's all good. If we go to the binding, instead of calling it text field, let's call it report. And in the layout for this particular field, I'm going to the height, and I'm going to say expand to fit. So as we write more, we want this to stretch. Now there's a couple of other properties we need to look at here. I'm just going to go to the paragraph properties, and I want the text to start from the top. I don't want it to be vertically centered. It looks a bit odd when you do that. And we'll go with left align, that's good too. And we'll just reduce the size of our area there. Now, we do need a button for people to click to add a new row. So what I am going to do, I could put this in on the left, but I'm just going to shorten my report field just a little bit to make room for a button in there to add a row. So far so good. Let's just preview that, and we've got 3 of them. And you'll also notice we get the date picker for the date. So that's all good. I'm happy with how that is at the moment. However, I want to jazz this up just a little bit. Now folks, just a little interruption here to our normal tutorial. I'm going to leave this slide in. You'll notice, you'll see here the LiveCycle Designer has stopped working. This doesn't happen that often, but it does happen with LiveCycle Designer. So while this isn't the objective of the tutorial, there is a valid little lesson here that we need to save regularly and save often as you're working with LiveCycle Designer. So what we're going to do is I'm going away for a second just to fix a few things up that I lost because I didn't save at the appropriate point. So whenever you've done a key step in the process, before you go into the preview to preview your PDF, you should save. And we'll be back in a moment. So before we were so rudely interrupted, what I was about to do was add a little bit of formatting here to snazz this up, and a button so we can add more rows. So let's start with the formatting. So I've selected my subform, and where I'm going to go is over to the border tab, and for edges I'm choosing edit together, and I'll go with the solid edge, although you could be a bit creative if you wanted to, and I'll choose a colour. I'll go with rounded corners, and I can go with a fill. I could go with a solid fill and choose a light colour for my solid fill. Do be aware of the needs of your vision impaired users before you get too carried away with the background colours. You may be better off just with black and white and not adding too much colour to this. Or we could even go with a gradient colour there where we choose a second shade. And so we've got a bit of a pine lime thing happening there. Now that is definitely going to give our vision impaired users a bit of grief. So what I might do is let's do it that way around. So I've said linear to bottom, a light yellow as my starting fill colour, white as the ending fill colour, so we get a nice little gradient effect happening there. Now at this point I'm going to save, A, because it's good practice, and B, because what just happened before reminds us that it is good practice, that occasionally our ever reliable Adobe software will fall over. So we've got our 3 starting forms with a nice little bit of formatting, just enough to make it interesting but not enough to get in the way. Okay, so let's recap where we've got our subform set up. We're about to add a button so that we can add more of these as we go along. So where we need to go is up to the object library, so to give myself a bit more room, and I need the button tool, and we'll drag that in and drop it in there. And we now need to get into our object properties. So we're now in the object properties for our button. I'm just going to amend the caption just to put a nice simple instruction there to say add a row. Okay, now what we need to do at this point is we need to head up to Tools and the Action Builder. So we'll go Tools, Action Builder. We're going to add a new action, and we're going to say when the object button 1 is clicked, we want something to happen, and we want to add a new instance. That is a new copy of something, in this case a new copy of our subform called AA report. So what that will do, when we click the button, it will add a new instance of that particular object. Now what's happening here is when we use the action builder, LiveCycle Designer is actually writing the code to make this work, which means we don't need to write any code, which I'm happy with that. Okay, so what we've got now, I'm going to save that again, and we'll go to preview, and let's just test that part of it out. So we can add rows, we can add lots and lots and lots of rows, and that's looking pretty good. And we've filled our page, and we've got our continued on next page, and there's our next object on the next page. Add another subform to allow for a digital signature and some instructions to our end users. Now, I'm just off screen copying some text that will represent our instructions, and we're going to the main form. Now, you'll actually notice up the top here, I've got the script editing window open at the moment. We can actually see some of the script that's been automatically generated earlier on. Now, just close that up, because we don't need to see that. And I'm also going to get rid of the preview HTML option. So I'm back on the main form, and I'm going to right click here and insert another subform. Now, as with our original AA report, that's actually positioned, but the key thing here is it's positioned within a flowed form. Now, I'm going to have another positioned object here, and with this positioned object, I'll stretch it out a little bit to make some room, and this is going to be our bottom part of the form, where we'll have some instructions for our end users. So I've just dropped the text object in there, and I've got some instructions for our end users. Now, my little warning here is saying this contains misspelled text. We're actually cool with that because it's Latin filler. It's not. It's just there to serve as text for us. And I'm also going to add a signature field. Now, you'll notice, just to digress, the signature scribble here. That's if you're developing this to be used on a tablet. People with a stylus can scribble their signature into it like a delivery form. What we want, however, is a conventional as in conventional digital signature field, which LiveCycle Designer gives us one of those. So I'll bring that in there. That's just our little message about our digital signatures. Again, just saving as we go along. Make that a little bit bigger. Now, with our digital signature field, we have some settings here for this as well. So I'll just change the caption there just to say signature. But you could be saying sign and lock report, for example. And when I go to the signature tab, this is going to lock the fields after signing. Now, that's actually optional, but we will do it in this case. And we'll lock all the fields, but you could actually define a collection, which could be key fields that are to be locked. But we'll lock the fields there, and that's all we really need to do, so that people getting this form that receive it or use it after can't actually edit the locked report. Okay, so far so good. Let's save that. And now what we're going to do is preview. So let's see how this works. We can pick a date, how many hours. We can enter some text. Now I'm cheating here a little bit and pasting, but we can see our subform stretching. Now, a couple of key points here. We have to make sure that we've got the height set to stretch for the field, that is the report field, and the subform. When we finish previewing, I'll take you back through that setting to see and double check it. So what I also want to demonstrate here is our data stretching and flowing over. So I've added quite a bit in there, and we're very close to the bottom of the page. Very, very close indeed. So we've got another interaction. Now, so we're continued on the next page. We can see the message appearing. We don't quite have enough content to see what happens when we do move over to the next page. So I'll just add a few more paragraphs of my stuff in there. So now we can see really clearly that our variable length multi-line text box is actually stretching over onto the following page, and it's keeping its position. Okay, and that, what enables that to happen is our subform is positioned but within a flowed subform so that things can still flow. So we can add another one, and we see our date of action, our hours used. Sorry, just tried to put some text in there instead of a number, and a little bit of a report, and that might be the end of our form. We've now got our instructions that tell us to sign the form. I've got my digital signature here. Now this is a self-signed ID, so it's not an official ID issued by a proper certificate issuing authority, but it's perfectly good for testing and using within the organisation perhaps. The reason it lacks credibility for more widespread use is a self-signed ID is just Stephen Knight saying, hey, I'm Stephen Knight. So that's now signed that, which has the effect of locking our report. You'll notice we can't edit that, so that's effectively a signed report that we're saying this is what we've done. And that's ready to print out or do whatever you might need to do with it. So I'm just going back now. So just to finish up, let's review what we've got going on here. So what we did first up was we created a text object to put our message. That message went inside a subform, which then we dragged into our referenced objects. We then went up to the main form, and in the main form we went to the pagination, and we said, look, let the overflow trailer be our continue message subform. So it has to be in the referenced objects for us to be able to pick it in that list. Now, what we then did was we made our actual AA report. We have it as positioned, but just to recap, within the main form is flowed and allows page breaks. So we've got this form positioned, meaning the content within it is positioned, and in the binding we've allowed it to repeat. We've set a minimum of 1, and we've started off with 3, which we saw that earlier, that we got 3 to start with. Now, our other key field here that I want to look at is this report field. Now, what this is a multi-line text field. We're allowing page breaks within the content. What we also need to see here, I'm just going to go Window Layout to bring up the layout. With this particular field here as well, we've ticked the expand to fit, which means that as our text gets bigger, the height will stretch for us. Now similarly, if I go over to the report subform itself, the AA report subform, is that set to auto fit for the height as well. You need both of those to be on. We then added the add row button, and we used our tools and the action builder to set up an action that says when that button's clicked, add a new instance of our report. What we've also got is another subform, again positioned. I haven't allowed page breaks with this one because maybe we need the instructions and the signature to stick together. So I'm happy for them to move over onto a new page as one unit. So we won't allow page breaks there. And basically then that's our working form. The signature, of course, allowing us to sign and lock the fields. So that is our form. Good luck with that. Just build it up step by step. Make sure you save regularly. Now, LiveCycle Designer is not normally as misbehaving as it has been for me for this session. I do recommend saving at regular intervals. I suspect what's happening here is I'm running Captivate and LiveCycle Designer together, and there must be some issue there. It shouldn't be a resource issue. I've got 16 gig of RAM here and an i7 processor, so that shouldn't be the problem. But there's clearly something happening there. But in your normal use with LiveCycle Designer, I would still save at regular intervals, save before you preview, and then you should be okay. Good luck with that. Any questions, please contact me via the question and comment facility here on the YouTube site, or via trainerscope.com. Or also, if you've been on a course with me, just feed any questions back through the training provider that you booked the course with, and they'll pass your questions on. I am more than happy to answer questions. So good luck with your forms, and save regularly. Bye for now.